Hey there, friends. Welcome to Realife Conversations for Christian Coaches. I'm your host, Teresa McCloy.
And I'm Erica Vinson. We are so glad that you're listening in today. Here on the podcast, each week, we want to have real conversations to help you grow a successful and sustainable coaching business, and yet still stay connected to what truly matters.
We come each week to share practical tools, honest stories, and our own experiences as coaches. And we invite some great guests on the show to support you as a coach. And we invite some great guests on the show to support you as a coach to live from a place of rest, not rush.
So, whether you're just getting started or been coaching for years, you're in the right place. So, let's dive into today's conversation.
Erica, how's your week going?
It's great. Just wrapping up another week of coaching and equipping. It's fun.
Yeah. So we are recording today on a Friday, which is not our normal routine. So it is that. Okay, here we are at the end of the week and just taking a breath and diving in, as many of you are when you get to the end of your week as a coach. We talked a couple episodes ago about what are the habits that I have? How do I want to wrap up my week? We're recording here on a Friday morning, and both of us are going to be wrapping up our weeks here in just a few hours and moving into our weekend and that kind of rhythm. But before we do, we wanted to record this episode, get ahead on our recording patterns. And today we want to follow up from the last episode where we talked about the three paths of coaching that you might look at and have some confidence as you choose a path as a life coach, leadership coach, spiritual formation coach. And to follow up with that, we both thought it might be good to even then talk about, okay, I know my path I'm on, but what are the tools that I need to be on that path? But before we go down that and talk about assessment tools, framework tools, reflection tools, Eric could share a little bit from your own story as a coach when you think about tools that you use as a coach. And we're talking about tools that you use in a session with a client. We use lots of tools. We have time management tools and all kinds of things that we do, tech equipment, things. These tools we're talking about are what we use in a session with a client. What's been your experience as you've become a more experienced coach over the years with tools?
I was first exposed to tools as a client when I started coaching circles, which back in 2014 was my first introduction to group coaching. I was sent coaching really tools to use. And one was the tool of the Enneagram. The second was actually oneLife maps, which is a full circle God story for
It is.
It was map number 2, my life story, where I was just asked to plot out what had been my life story in highs and lows and all of those things. And I never really seen it laid out that way. So those tools have been instrumental in my growth, but were something that just helped to start my journey. And so I've used both of those tools with clients, even moving forward, because they were so impactful for me when it's been helpful.
I think I probably had the same experience thinking back. My first kind of experience with it wasn't really group coaching by any means, but when I was in the Transforming Center and was walking through that cohort of spiritual formation that you and I have both experienced, there I experienced things like the maps, like Enneagram. It is a full circle moment that now the maps are a part of, as Sybil Towner, Sharon Swing, Joan Kelly, all of these people that were a part of those maps have come along and asked us to steward that tool forward. So that's crazy. We'll talk about that tool here in the podcast. But those were some of my first tools. And then when I hired my first coach, who happened to be my academic advisor when I was getting coach training, she introduced me to some other things like a 360 personality tool. I think at that point I might have been introduced to some CliftonStrengths and some discs. Most of the tools I was introduced to in the beginning were around personality. And then as I started coaching with others, my wiring, just the way I am for my own confidence, knowing my spiritual formation journey and some other things, I really loved some type of framework to work with clients. Over a period of time, I ended up creating a framework the real life process framework. We often refer to it as a modern day rule of life framework or a life management framework, depending on your context and who you're working with. So we have our own framework. And as a coach, when I talk to coaches, many of them really desire to create a framework of their own. So I just want to say if you have that dream, I encourage you, go after it. Start using some of those things with clients. Don't be afraid to create your own unique framework. And whatever God's given you and laid on your heart might be something that will be hugely impactful. We've seen that in the Realife Process Framework. These are ways that we've experienced different tools. Erica, let's dive into talking about these three categories. Why don't you set us up with the first category, which is the category of assessment tools?
The assessment tools that we're going to spend a little bit of time with really just help to increase self-awareness.
Mhm.
And it gives the coach and the client a starting point for deeper work. One of the things we repeatedly talk about with our coaches is it gives language. And so anytime I remember studying abroad as a college student, and anytime I was in a new country or culture, when you would hear someone else that spoke English, it was like there was a trust and safety that I could actually reach out and ask for help. Just that simple enlightenment for me translates even to now of going, I feel heard. I feel seen when I have some common language. What are some of those assessment tools, Teresa, that have been impactful for you or that you use with clients?
When I think of examples of assessment type tools, one of the ones that we have that's unique to us is something we call the real life needs and values. That's a tool that our coaches that are certified have access to use. And a lot of coaches use some type of assessment around values. I think what's unique for this one is looking at needs. And again, we've done some podcast episodes on needs and values, and just there's two categories there. Again, giving someone language. Many coaches use some type of assessment like CliftonStrengths, Enneagram, or a DISC. There's all kinds of assessments out there. And what I would say about assessments is once you've chosen a path, I really resonate with life coaching or leadership coaching or spiritual formation coaching, then what assessment aligns well with that kind of work? That would be where I think an actionable thing would be here. If you need an assessment tool, how would it work? Erica, how have you found using these types of assessment in your own coaching and with other coaches that we work with? What do you see come up most often?
Well, another decision point for you as a coach is once you say which assessment actually aligns with my client, how do I want to use this? Is
Mhm.
this something that is part of my onboarding routine that I have as a rhythm with every client? It's just something I offer. Is it something I want to invite them to? It's not a prerequisite, but if it's helpful, or is my style more to actually weave in the assessment as I'm working with them and their needs arise? But these are like tools when you think about wearing them around and just knowing what you have and saying, okay, when my client mentions feeling that they're lacking peace or that things feel out of control, they might be really speaking to going, my needs are not being met. And so just intuitively knowing that, inviting them in that moment. So I think even knowing what is the routine or how do I want to engage these tools is really that second part of using assessments.
I totally agree with you that you have to find your rhythm. And we will say this often as we talk about growing your coaching business. You have to try things out. And it's okay. You're not going to break your client. You might go, the next 3 or 4 clients that I onboard, I'm going to use an assessment with them up front. And then you might go, that doesn't feel like my personality. So I'm going to weave them in. There's no right or wrong. I think that's something we get asked so many times by our certified coaches as they come through certification is, okay, so I have to do it. No, you can weave and you can experiment and find what feels good for you and what feels good for the clients that you're serving. I would say the nugget from this is assessments don't define the client. You don't want to get hooked by what you get back in that assessment, but they can help you have the right conversations and give your client some language that maybe they've never had before. to talk about themselves, understand themselves, and maybe accept themselves in some new and different ways. Let's look at the next kind of group, which we call framework tools. Let's share a little bit about what those are and some examples of those as well.
Framework tools assist and offer some structure to your coaching conversation, and they help move your client from the awareness that they're gaining to some action, which is what clients are paying you for. They're going to have a default future. I love Rich Litvin's work in The Prosperous Coach. He talks about that. Every one of us have a default future. We're going to hopefully continue to move forward, but there is this gap that we can help clients really achieve, that created future. It's not just the default when they're working with us as a coach. So that action's really where the fruit is.
When you think about examples of this type of coaching that might help them fill in the gap, there are things like our process. The real life process has 4 components that our coaches learn and that we use with our clients. They're all uniquely different. You can use them standing alone, you can use them all together as a framework. But that is one example of a framework coach approach. Built within that, we have a coaching tool called the Now tool to notice, open to all 3 centers, become aware. That's also a framework. My friend Todd Hall has a framework around relational spirituality. There, something as simple as many coaches, you may have heard things like SMART goals or CLEAR or these acronym words that have 3 or 4 letters. Those are really all examples of frameworks. One in the business world that I've worked with a lot and a lot of my clients love is entrepreneurial operating system, often referred to as traction, EOS. I have a version of that I use with my clients called the 7 P's of business. That's a business framework. Depending on what path you're on, you might use these in coaching. Erica, when you think about using frameworks in coaching, and I know you use our framework quite often, what are some positive ways that you see frameworks used in coaching?
Frameworks give us handles because when we show up with clients, we want to coach the person, not the problem. And I think frameworks can help us be present and to know that there is a pathway. So we as a coach, the client is responsible for what direction do you want to go? Where are you? Where do you want to be? For each session, establishing an agreement, the client gets to agree upon and establish what that looks like. But then there is a comfortability of knowing as a coach, I get to help establish that agreement with them, I get to facilitate that awareness. And then we're actually going somewhere and there's going to be some action. And so that trust and that safety that's cultivated, which is one of those ICF core competencies, it is so powerful just to know that there is a pathway and our clients can trust us to guide that as we go.
Having some type of framework gives the start and the end. It helps with the big agreement for newer coaches in the first 1 to 3 years in their business. A framework can be helpful because it can give that pathway that you have confidence in and your client have confidence in. Some frameworks also give you marketability. Many times a certification or a training in a certain type of framework or assessment can give you confidence and marketability as well. You don't have to necessarily use the entire framework. You can pull pieces out if you know the framework well. It gives you internal confidence as a coach with the framework we created and with other frameworks I've done with business clients, especially is they now have a repeatable process. So they can do it on their own. That doesn't mean they won't ever need you again, but you can leave the relationship and the agreement knowing that you gave them something very generous that they can now put into their lives and repeat that process over. They're going to need you again as a coach. They've got a foundation now through some of these frameworks that they can walk away with. Frameworks bring a rhythm and a direction to the journey without removing the client's ownership. Yesterday, I was working with one of our coaches in a coaching session. She is coaching inside another organization. And we were talking about, she has 12 weeks in this program, and it's a framework that she needs to take the client through. The big A agreement is she's hired as an internal coach to get the outcome of those 12 sessions The little A agreement is what the client brings to each of those sessions, starting with, how are you showing up to the call today? Yes, we're going to talk about values. And that's going to be where we go. A client knows that and you know that, but it's making that smaller agreement. She was struggling a little bit of, am I getting where we need to go? And I'm like, I have 12 sessions to cover this content. So that's the only thing I would give pause to for coaches. Don't think, oh, I've got to stay on track. It's a big A agreement with little A agreements in this session, and the client has the ownership of where that particular session goes. So let's move on to our third category of tools, and that is reflection tools. Erica, what are we talking about when we say things like reflection tools?
Reflection tools really can deepen insight for us as a coach. They create space for that inner work that we want to continue to do on the journey. And they really strengthen the client's voice in the process of coaching. So it's such a powerful part. I think sometimes in the real life process, we talk about creating margin or white space, allowing that space not to just move from one thing to the next, but actually reflect. That time can be powerful in a session where silence can be effective for us as a coach, just quieting and really noticing what just happened as I was with the client.
Yeah, one place that comes to mind is the prep form. If you use some type of prep form, that's actually allowing your client 5 minutes to take a breath before they come to the call. And maybe that's something that you have set up electronically through technology. Maybe it's something they send you as a PDF. I have even sometimes with clients say, would you like to take 5 minutes and just write a few things down? You know, if you're doing 50-minute calls or 45-minute calls, that 5 minutes where you both shut your screens off and they just take a breath and reflect, either at the beginning or the end of a call, might be the only 5 minutes in their day where they had that space. So you can build in reflection tools very easily just with giving space. But some other ways that you might is maybe you give clients a journaling prompt. Maybe you do give them time for silence and solitude. Or if you're really in the spiritual formation coaching path, maybe it is you have some practices. That's the actionable part when you get to the end of a session. What's the practice or discipline, it's sometimes called, that is going to align? One of the things in the book that we put out in 2022, Do What Matters, one of the chapters, I think it's chapter 9, is called The Practices Behind the Process. These practices are really some of the roots that many of our clients are wanting and desiring. I think another one, and we mentioned it early in this podcast, is the oneLife maps. Life maps are a beautiful spiritual tool to use with people in this space. We interweave those a lot of times in the framework of the process of, there's a map at the very beginning called My Life. Where are you? Where are you going? What's the big question that you're holding? So something tangible like the maps is fits in two categories. It's a little bit of a framework that you can work, but each individual map of the 8 maps could be a standalone that you use with the client. The other thing I would say about the maps is they're just great coaching questions in the maps that if you never give the client the actual map, you've got great reflection questions there. Erica, how are reflection tools used within a coaching session?
Well, I remember my mentor coach saying to me at one point, I remember naming an action that I needed to take. And she just paused and said, would you like to do that now? And it just flipped my mind. And I said, you mean during the session? Because I thought, oh, I need to do that after. And it helped to broaden my perspective that aligns exactly with what you're saying, Teresa, of when you are working with especially high performing leaders, people who are really valuing their time and the people they're connecting with, they don't often have the space outside of, but they have created it with you. So you may need to offer that moment for them. It could be very powerful, even just in a simple question and a pause.
What you're saying there, I think, is really helping a client. If you give them time in that session to practice one of these tools, I think you also allow them to experience it in a safe place. Maybe you turn off your camera if you're on Zoom or video and let them do that. That may be the most valuable part of your session, as you're saying, but they practiced it now and may want to desire to take action on it outside of the session because they get to practice it and then maybe even talk through what it was like for them. I love that as a reflection. What else do you think is a way that you could use some of these tools of reflection?
Reflection tools can be helpful even in between sessions. So that's something to consider when you're forming that big agreement is what is the relationship like in between sessions? Am I available? If I've given my client something, do I want to engage with them or create an opportunity in between? They're also helpful in helping clients draw out what's inside of them. How are they sharing that? Maybe not just with you as a coach, their action and accountability want them to be creating those support systems within their life rhythms and their circle of influence. It helps so much even in recentering. The final thing I think, Teresa, is we've been talking about assessments, frameworks. The reflection piece can be part of that as well. So when we're maintaining a coach approach using assessments or a framework, we're not straying from that coach approach. The reflection piece of that can be if they've taken an assessment or if they're using a framework, what are you noticing? As you see this framework, what new awareness is coming? How does that land with you? Any of those types of things. It might even be a closed question that comes
Yeah.
in that moment in reflection that gives them the agency they need in the moment.
This is such a great conversation in just categorizing even a little bit, but also getting up on the balcony to say they all belong. They all can be helpful and useful. You don't have to use any of these to be a great coach. To show up with your clients does not require any of these things. It does not require that you use assessments. It does not require that you have framework tools or reflection tools. None of these tools are needed, but many times they can be helpful. That nugget around reflection tools is really helping to slow us down, mostly our clients, to hear what really matters in this space. God is often speaking, especially if you're showing up with someone who their faith is a huge part of what they're doing and how they reflect, helping them to see the space, the white space, the margin, where God is, where the Holy Spirit is going to be a huge part of them recentering and coming back to center. One of the visuals we use in our framework is a triangle. The bottom of that triangle is what we call real life being. The middle is real life, and the top is the real work. So that foundation of coming back to our center, reflecting in those ways is going to be a part of all of this. I do love this conversation of getting some categories though and giving coaches a way to reflect. You can use any of these tools in your tool belt. If you visualize, like Erica was saying, okay, I'm going into coaching. Right now I'll have the hammer, but I also need some pliers and a screwdriver. One thing, when you think of that picture, don't get your tool belt too full. That you are so covered up by tools, but I think there could be an overgo as well for your client.
If you think about a messy toolbox as that metaphor, right, of going, I know it's here somewhere. We can overwhelm a client and take
Mm.
her a conversation. It moves from the direction of being a coaching conversation to where we start going, oh, here's all the things I know. So just noticing that and the excitement we have, because it is going to trigger us to go, oh, I had an aha exactly like my client. So just the awareness, but also that pace you were talking about of slowing down ourselves can help us show up really self-disciplined and aware and awake to go, oh, there actually is a tool for that. And your client then can give permission and say, yeah, that would be great. Show me what you have.
And I think there's another side to this. We didn't talk about it on this podcast, but I'll say it here just for reference is watch in your own self. I think you just said it like, oh, I've done an Enneagram and I've done a strengths and I've used the real life process and I've done this and I've done that. And so you're excited, but it might not have the same outcome for your client. So learning to listen as to when to use tools and leaning into how those tools have helped you. We often have people that come through our certification and say, wow, I think this was just for me. This framework was for me to live from rest, not rush, through the work that I do, through the life that I lead, through the relationships that I have. And it's going to reflect in my coaching. But I don't know that I'm ever going to bring up any of it, but it was great for my own self. Don't overwhelm your own self with assessments and tools and frameworks. Lean in and discern what's right for you. We want to share with you, as we talked about these coaching tools, we do want to invite you to consider and discern checking out our brand new certification cohort that we have coming up this summer, the Realife Process Coach Certification. It's going to begin on July 29th. So if you're listening to this in real time, it's about 6 weeks out. We have a brand new format for the summer cohort that we're really excited about, because we are encouraging our coaches that are coming in to be certified to choose a specific path, and that we're going to work with you with that path of life and leadership coaching or spiritual formation coaching. And we'll help you decide. So don't think, oh, I got to choose. We'll meet with you and we'll help you decide the right path. You'll all be together in one cohort, but then we'll break out according to the path that you're on, how to use our framework, our assessments, and our reflection tools. We do happen to have all three within this cohort, in how you would use them in the path that you're choosing.
So as part of that cohort, you're going to actually receive access to the Real-Life Process Framework, which has the 4 components. You talked about using them all together. They can be used a la carte based on your client need, plus the tools. They're also going to be that practical training in using the framework. So anything that we do, this is not just knowledge, but we want to use not just the information, but for transformation. So how could you, if you are desiring to move forward, use this for your own life, but then also with individuals, groups, and teams, and get you right up and running in that way? If you are an ICF credentialed coach, we're excited that this program actually offers CCEs. You can earn 20 CCEs. 13 of those are in core competency, other 7 of those in resource development. You're going to get a supportive community. So entrepreneurship can feel like you're all out there just doing this alone.
It can.
And you certainly are not. There's a great faith-based community of coaches and network. And then most of all, a way for you and your clients to live from rest, not rush.
In the past 5 years, we've certified about 80 coaches, and they have a path to follow and learn how to apply the tools. We encourage you, if you're like, oh, that could be something I could do over the summer, starting there at the end of the July, finishing up about the end of October, between the community and the live training. It's about 9 to 12 weeks of learning. And so we'd love to come alongside you. You can check that out by going to the reallifeprocess.com/get certified. And we spell real life with 1 L. You can go to the show notes here too in this episode.
And as you move forward, even from listening today, I want to just invite you to an action step of reflection. Take a moment and assess your tool belt. What life experiences have you had? What's been transforming for you? What are you drawn to and is really life-giving? And notice and name. Is there anything there that maybe I already have that I'm not accessing, or what's missing that I would love to incorporate into my tool belt? If you're drawn to the real life process, we would love to be in conversation with you. And so we'd love to set up a chat and talk to you about those tools and how they might work for you more personally.
As we wrap up today, it's been a fun conversation. I love talking about anything coaching, and I'm loving how we've shifted the podcast. I hope that you'll share it with others. The biggest compliment you could pay us is to share it with another coach on the journey with you as a resource for them, an absolutely free resource. We're on YouTube now. You can watch there if you'd like to see our bright, shiny faces. But we encourage you to remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. And we'll be back next week with more conversation, and look forward to being with you then.
Have a blessed week, everyone.